y'all, it's your girl, Coach Christal, and welcome to another installment of Wisdom Wednesday, and not just any other installment of Wisdom Wednesday. This is our last part 3 in a series with Dr. Curt, Jasper, and tonight we're talking about he and I's favorite topic to chop it up about together, SoulCare. But before we jump in, I want to welcome you to the Steps and Stages community, and if you're just joining us, if this is your first time watching or tuning into Wisdom Wednesday, I want to welcome you in with our mantra that just says, a lot of things happen before this, and I guarantee a lot of things are going to happen after this, but I promise to be here with you now. Please be here with me now. Listen, it's not just a privilege or a practice to be in the moment. It's a lifestyle. And when we actually are able to account for every moment, we know that we don't miss a thing. We don't have that FOMO about missing out on something we should have been, could have been doing. We actually are so deeply invested in the moment that there can be nothing else more valuable than what we are or what you are doing right now. So welcome to Wisdom Wednesdays. Without any further ado, please help me welcome our guest tonight, our friend in a 3-part series, Dr. Curt Jasper. Woo, 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 woo.
What's good?
We are not dressed alike tonight, y'all. But if you go back to episode 2, we had on the matching swag. You know, just saying. Tonight, we're gonna talk about SoulCare, Curt. Let's just stop for a second because we actually had this conversation about a year ago on the podcast, and so maybe some people saw that, some people didn't, and some people might not really be familiar with your perspective or my perspective on SoulCare. So I'm gonna let you start. What is SoulCare?
That's a good question. For me, SoulCare is the craft of life, right? It's how you craft your life, right? And so it has evolved over the last 10 years for me, exactly, because I'm still obviously figuring it out. But when I think about SoulCare, it's really like how you craft your life. And of course, I'm in the psychology space, so I use the distinction that psychology is a science and SoulCare is an art. Right? And that's how I assign it for myself. So for me, SoulCare is the craft of one's life. And that could show up in a number of ways.
I like it. You know, there are going to be many people here who, you know, might be like, well, don't worry about me. I got a self-care practice. My self-care routine is intact. And that's when, you know, sometimes we, not you and I, but me and the kind of general public or people outside my practice might bump heads because I might say, you know, self-care is about the maintenance of the shell, and SoulCare is about the nurturing of the actual spirit that's running the machine. And so when people go and get their nails done and their hair done, I'm not saying don't do that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying, right? I'm not saying don't go and keep the outside maintained, but I'm saying that you got to match the inside with the outside, right? And so SoulCare for me is a deeper understanding of well-being, and well-being like a deep well. Every time we practice SoulCare, we're pouring something into the well so that we don't have to go and try to scoop from something that's empty or react when we don't have enough.
Get it? Yeah. I like it. Yeah, I agree. There's a genuineness for the internal SoulCare, which makes it different than self-care, right? There's many people do very well taking care of the external, but still are finding their way in terms of their own genuineness, their own depth, and their own imagination. And so when I think of SoulCare, I think the internal stuff, right? Because it's not work for everybody, right? For some, right? It's not work. There's a level of depth and genuineness that must be attained.
Like when, you know, a lot of women or a lot of people who are, you know, again, recovering workaholics like me, SoulCare could be taking a nap, but it's hard to nap. Like taking a nap could be hard. I mean, listen, I don't rest like that. I rest like, you know, I got to be doing something, but my mind can be turned off, but my body can still be moving, right? And so a lot of people are thinking that the prescribed versions of self-care are the way that they get to their SoulCare. What do you think about, you know, because we got to start at different places. What do you think about how the practice begins?
So I think it's different for everybody. I've known people such as yourself who take care of their soul with a lot of movement, take naps, and I sit still, right? And so, that's the way I nourish my soul when I think of care, right? It's the immobile, like I'm totally immobile. But I respect, obviously, I work with people who are in high motion and they really nourishing their soul. They're nourishing their soul. So I think it's different for everybody. Now, how one starts, that's an interesting question, Coach Christal, because again, that comes from different people at different times. Some people ease into it, some people crash into it.
Yeah.
So I think it's different though. For me, I kind of crashed. And as I was flying it, after I got back in the air. So that's different. That's different for different people, I believe.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the soul, most people only use that language and that word when it has a religious context, right? And so I want to kind of back up a little bit and just kind of break this down for people who I just want you to understand the way I understand it, right? And you don't have to agree. I just want us to have an understanding. So I believe that religion is the practice of attaining your fullest spiritual capacity. So I don't know what that is for you. It could be Judeo-Christian, it could be Islamic, it could be whatever it is, but you're putting into practice a discipline that is trying to train the spirit to reattach itself to the soul. So again, y'all don't have to agree. I'm just throwing that out there, okay? Now, when the spirit, the individual, the personality, the personal piece reattaches to the eternal piece, which is the soul, the replenishment happens by serving the practice of the soul. Now, you're saying you had to kind of crash into it. I think some of us get dissected from it because we get lost in the religiosity of right, wrong, and real.
Is
that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. Okay. There's some unchurching that comes with a lot of people as they go into this idea of soul care, right? Caring for the soul. There has to be some unchurching that's involved.
And unchurching in a way that kind of, goes back to our kind of thematic question for the season of like where, last season specifically, like, the family is the cradle of misinformation, right? And so when we think about the unchurching, we're thinking about, this is a scaffolding of how someone is trying to help me get there, but their scaffolding might be building the wrong type of structure to hold the thing that I have, right? And so, you got the shirt on. It is Mental Health Month, right? But when we think about mental as attached to the soul, where's the pathway for most people, Curt?
So again, a great question. I think there is I wore this shirt on purpose because I knew it was that. So there's a colonized version that'll show up under this umbrella, right? Mental health matters, right? The pathway is actually through the soul. It's externalized and intellectualized in the mentality.
Yeah.
But that's the westernized version. The ancestral piece is it starts in the soul. It starts in the soul. Everything else is externalized. So what's the pathway? Within. Within. The pathway is from within out. Right? From within out. So when we talk about, mental health as it relates, those are symptoms of an uncared for soul.
Okay. Yeah. Right?
Okay. Sort of like addictions and obsessions.
Yeah.
Right. Mental challenges, addictions, obsessions, those are symptomatic of an uncared soul. Right. So it's abuse and loss of meaning and purpose and things of that nature. I'm speaking generally, but those are usually a neglect as a result of a neglect of caring for the soul.
Yeah, I can hear that, right? Because also when we see people who overindulge in the practice of religion to the point where they can't speak individually for themselves, or we see people who are checked out so much from any type of spiritual practice that they are finding themselves isolated in their own, what feels like a decision, but it's really a separation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting, because it forgive me because I was looking down because I was looking for this quote I was reading this past week, and it says, because you were talking about, like it's from the beginning, the soul is the beginning, and from the beginning, right, we're basically perfect until we unlearn our perfection, and then we fight to get it back.
To get back, right?
So this says becoming a genuine individual requires learning the opposition within oneself. Those who fail or refuse to face the oppositions within themselves have no choice but to find enemies to project upon. Enemies simply means not friend. Unless a person deals with their not friend within, it requires them to have enemies around them.
I feel that.
Right. Yeah, that's Michael Meade. But when we think about that, we gotta, like, that awareness piece we talked about a couple of weeks ago. You gotta really find out who you picking these fights with and why you haven't fought that part of you.
Yeah. So the projection of the fight is the fight of you, right? It's misdirected, but the projection is still, you're swinging in the air to land on something that you projected, because that's still trying to find the way, right? In my opinion, projecting it out is still an attempt to find the way. And of course, when we just make the distinction between soul work and soul care and religion, people have their beliefs, and I offer people, like, whatever your belief, even if it's not a belief, it's still a belief. Whatever your faith, even if you lack faith, it's still faith, right? Everybody has a belief and faith in something. Failure, success, Christianity, right? So we externalize this whole distinction of you do this and you see it that way. It's all practice thought. It's all practice thought, which is the underbelly of what a belief actually is.
Right. Ingrained. Yeah, exactly. And reinforced. It's interesting, right? Because, like you're saying, when we think about this original soul, and then we think about really, again, like trying to get back to our original perfection, we want to have faith in a structure that says it's going to get us there, right? And so we do the same thing with education. We do the same thing with jobs. We do the same thing with relationships. We're like, are you going to make me happy, right? Like, are you going to get me certified? Are you going to write all the things that we think can be finite, but you can't use finite tools with an infinite substance.
For sure.
Right. And I think that's where we sometimes get caught up. What's something that you think is a practice that can actually, I don't know, maybe like bring those two things in alignment? How do we, as like finite bodies, take care of something we hold that's infinite?
So I think one of the two aspects that show up on a pathway. There's this idea of fulfilling work and purpose and rewarding relationships.
Okay.
Right. And so to have them both firing off on all cylinders, which most of us, including myself, we kind of waver on it, right? So when it comes to fulfilling work and purpose, whatever that is, and I don't necessarily mean your career path or your chosen profession, just fulfilling work. It could be gardening on the weekends. And also the second part of that would be rewarding relationships, like really high quality, rewarding relationships. I think the absence of those take a toll on soul care.
Yeah, I could see that. Because there's no nourishment funnel.
Correct.
Correct. I was, we were recently in Japan, my son and I, and one of the beautiful things is that we had different tour guides every day. And the last day we were there, we had a tour guide who was a transplant from Australia. And he had the most beautiful transformation story one I've ever heard. Like, he grew up in a low income neighborhood, just thought he wasn't able to go to college. In his 40s, decided he was going to go to university, like then got a master's, is now in Japan, like building homes and like doing all these amazing things and just being a free person, right? Outside the kind of narrative of his upbringing. And he was telling me, similar to what you're kind of describing long term, is that when we lose our connection to people, when we don't have fulfilling work, we find ourselves detached and isolated. And that is the opposite of caring for the soul, because the soul is a relational entity. And then he was telling me that his father had retired. And he said in Australia at the time, that category of men had the highest suicide rate. And he said, the only thing that saved my father was the man shed. And I said, I'm thinking like a little tool shed in the backyard. And he said, no, there was this movement where these retired men started inviting each other to this woodshed to make things together, to talk, just to sit and have coffee. And it became like the thing. Now it's got all these satellites that dissipated the rate of suicide.
Yeah.
And so it's exactly what you're saying. It's the relational and it's the purposeful work.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Agreed. Wow, that's good.
I think in our country, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't looked at these statistics for a while, but I was looking at them in relationship to my own family dynamics. And it was saying that middle-class African-American, just middle-class men, working men, like 40s, 50s, had a high suicide rate, right? Because they hit a plateau of what else is there for me to do? When do you how do you recalibrate the soul when you think you've done all you can do, Curt?
That's a good question. It takes a lot of things, a lot of time. I think as men, particularly men from the previous generation of me, we came in like we got to protect and provide. We are only regarded to our value externalized, right? Mm-hmm. And so when the kids are out the house and the career levels up, we go into retirement. We're left with the soul, and that becomes a scary thing because now we have to focus on being without the doing part. That becomes so frightening. It's like, I don't want to be here. I don't know what this is like. I done did 50, 60 years of earning my keep through my doing this. Now you're asking me to set aside, the means of which I did that and just be. I'm a man. I don't do the warm and fuzzy soul work stuff. No. Right?
Yeah.
And so the value starts to deteriorate, right? The value, the self-value, the self-worth starts to deteriorate. And for men, when the self-value deteriorates, it snatches the self-worth down.
Right. Okay. Yep. And if you've never developed that self-worth, what you're saying outside of the things you do or provide, then now we're in a whole other roller coaster of identity, value.
Yeah. And we don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It becomes so unbearable that we make attempts to stop the pain, right? That's what suicide is. Suicide is the completion of the attempt to stop the pain.
Wow. I mean, it's big, Curt. I think, which is why I think I have such a rebuttal to, and I'm not trying to offend nobody, but I just have a rebuttal to the self-care movement, right? Because it's reactionary. It's not responsive by nature, right? I can't believe I've worked my wits end, right? Which is what you're saying also about how people get to suicide. It's the last thing. It's the last attempt to end the pain. So if people have been battling, work stress, burnout, all these things, and they think a vacation is going to fix it, I worry. Because it's just like you're saying, I could go away for months, weeks, years, but when I come back, I still got to deal with me.
Yeah. Right. Because again, vacation, we're all taught to, what this means, right? Let's talk about the word vacation in and of itself. Like when we think of vacation, think of leaving the home, going somewhere. To vacate could be anywhere, right? You ain't got to get on the plane and go across the country. You can go in the woods 2 blocks over from your house, right? To vacate your environment to gain a new perspective, to debrief, to recreate, to rejuvenate. And so I think and I'll start with with the basic language. How we define who we are, what we feel, and what we're thinking is the start.
Yeah.
Because if we could think it differently, we could start to see it differently. And if we could start to see it differently, we could ultimately start to feel differently about what it is that we're seeing.
Exactly. Because we talked about this before, right? I think many people get stuck at the awareness phase, and then what they do is just maintenance.
Right.
I noticed that I work too many hours, so I'm gonna take 2 hours out of my schedule. We don't do it. We don't know we're doing that 2 hours, right? And God, the universe, the bigger picture, abhors a vacuum. So if I take 2 hours out of my schedule and I don't have it allocated to do something, it's gonna get filled with something. And I might not feel like I'm at work, but now I'm still working.
Correct.
And it's that part, right? It's that part that we're kind of trading apples for, like, plums or something. It doesn't really matter, right? We're not actually making a transformative shift in doing something different up here that trickles down to here.
Right.
And to go back to what you said before, right, about going in to come out, people are going in here and coming out of here. It's never getting to the heart. It's never getting down. It's never sinking down, right? And that kind of trickle down is really where the magic happens.
Yes. And to be clear, it's by design. I mean, when we talk about capitalism and racism, sex ableism, patriarchy, like, it's designed for it to go in here and come out, right? This ain't it. This ain't it, not from a capitalistic, standpoint. So the coercion is strong, right? It takes heavy advocacy to really make this soul care stuff available, right? There's some warriorship that I did, because I mean, a soulful person is complicated. It's multidimensional, multifaceted. There's success and failure, where there's gains and loss. There's new birth and death. Like, there's a lot that comes with a soulful person, which on a basic level we all are.
Yes.
We all are. And so I think just getting away from soul in and of itself, and then we got to, like you said, we got to attach it to something. Yeah, you take 2 hours off. So if we get away from the soul care, which we did, most of us at birth, we lose that genuineness. We lose that purity. But something like that, though.
Yeah.
Something feels that immediately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, immediately, right?
Immediately.
Okay, so I talk to my students about this all the time. Sometimes I talk to my clients about it, but mostly that younger generation, that college age generation. And we talk about this because they see big structures around them. There's racism, there's sexism, there's all these things that they want to fight. And I was like, yeah, but have you fought against your original colonists, like your family? Have you done that yet? Because they're the ones who told you that we're not going to feed you unless you do what we say. We're not going to pay for your college unless you do what we say, right? Like, it's an original kind of mentality here that we're serving something outside of ourselves. Like, and I joke with them all the time. I was like, you had them wrapped around your finger and then you gave away your power. And they're like, what do you mean? I was like, when you came in the world, you were crying, you were yelling, and they were trying to understand you. They were doing whatever you needed to ease your pain. And then you started talking like them. And then they said, oh, well, you figured it out yourself. Right? Like, it's one of those flings, right, where we miss that like original language, power, synthesis between our need and our advocacy for ourselves. And then when we get that back later, it has anger attached to it. It has, regret attached to it. It has legality attached to it. It's got pay raises attached. It's got you don't know me attached to it. It's got so many other rebuttals that are not attached to the soul at all. Now we're in, like you said, warrior mode, but we're fighting out there and not in here.
Well said. I like it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
I mean, okay, so if that's the case, what are the real, maybe real is too finite of a word, but what are the weapons of soul evolution?
The weapons of soul evolution.
Because we know about the weapons of mass destruction. Right? Yeah. We know about every other thing to fight all the. What are the weapons of soul evolution?
That's a good question. What shows up for me is presence, right? Like the lack thereof, I should say.
Yeah.
Presence shows up. I always go back to how you opened up about getting away from that genuineness, right? That's what when I've been thinking about this since that last one, like how we all have just got from the genuineness and finding that way back, the futile attempts to find that way back. Of course, there's jobs, and degrees, and houses, and family, and all that. Yeah. And then it's like, that ain't it. So I would think one of the weapons would be just presence or the lack thereof.
Okay.
Like, what does it mean to just be? Because the moving from the self-awareness part, the awareness is just the tip. Then there's the self-knowledge, and then there's the self-acceptance. For a lot of us, that acceptance piece is like, that ain't the feel-good part. Because you may have to confront your family. You may have to denounce the marriage. You may have to denounce the job, right? That self-acceptance comes with some stuff.
Yeah, that's big. But I mean, if we're accepting the self, right, of the construct we've created, we're getting closer to actually introducing ourselves to the soul.
Correct.
Right?
It just ain't pretty all the time.
No.
It just ain't pretty.
Exactly. And I think, when I think about this, Curt, when I talk about this with my clients and people, are like, oh, Christal, you're just so honest. And I was like, I don't have any other choice at this point. I mean, of course, maybe I do in like this, physical realm we're in, but not in here. Right? Like I can't. There's no going backwards. We don't do backwards. Right? Now, some people might be afraid to self-assess because it means they might have to start a part of their life over, but that's just a part of life. That's not you.
Right.
And so I think that self-assessment comes really, I think, at the sacrifice of the self.
Tell me more about that part.
So when we have this self-construct, right, and we want to do like this, I think before acceptance comes assessment. Like, do I really know this thing that I've been acting like? Is this really me? Like, I don't know. Right? All this kind of thing, right? I mean, and for the women out there, this the shave the head moment. You know what I mean? I've done it 3 times, but but this when somebody knows something about to happen because all the hair is gone. Oh, they're like, whoa, right? So the self-assessment into the self-acceptance is that cutting away of maybe the false narratives, maybe the inauthentic behaviors, and then there's a kind of a makeup period where we have to fall in love or forgive the pieces that weren't right that we held on to for so long. And then the self that was there, we might have to move it out of the way to construct a new one that's more aligned with the soul. Right? Like, and I'm thinking about this from the kind of way that we look at this in Buddhism, as if like the self is the construct and everything added onto it, the environment, the people, all of these, that's affect, the same way we look at personality. Right? But so I think sometimes part of it has to just die away so that we can actually get closer to the soul and not try to fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, when I think of my own story, that whole letting it all crumble, right, is oftentimes necessary, like critically necessary.
Yeah. But I think we hold on tight, right? And we hold on tight to the things that feel real, right? That we can see. They were like, okay, but I can't let go of my car. I can't see my soul, but I can see myself driving this car to work every day. So, if you grew up in families like ours, that people, what you mean? Your imagination. Can you imagine some food on your plate? You imagine, right? That type of like pushing that type of intelligence to the side and focusing on that tactile belief system that keeps us from imagining or seeing or even inviting ourselves to be more than we see in the moment. Yeah. Wow. I mean, what else you got, Curt? I mean, caring for your soul. We can talk about this all night.
Yeah, I want to tell me about your SoulCare. How did you get to the space? How did you arrive to just beyond the awareness part?
Yeah. So I was thinking about this before. I mean, I think about this a lot, actually. I'm always like, where are the crumbs that led to this? And so for me, I think the crumbs that led to this were being a child who was born 8 years after their sibling and basically being an only child in a house of people. So I was like the youngest, I was the baby. And so people talked around me, but they didn't talk to me. Right? And so they're kind of like being on the outskirts, being like this kind of cryptic observer and like figuring things out is in here. Right? And I'm one of those people similar to my son who grew up as a kid who could have really amazing conversations with adults. But at my time, that was not allowed. Right? People like, girl, stay out of grown folks' business, right? And so for people out there who met my son like you, right, you know that I do the exact opposite. I'd be like, tell me what I'm missing, right? So I'm doing that out of a response to what I know I needed at that age, right? So here I am, like kind of in this concurrent orbit of the family, but in my own kind of spatial plane, right? And so I know that much. I know that people really do listen to me when I go do this dancing thing. And I know that I have this other world that I can't quite grasp or check into because maybe at this point I'm not Black enough. I don't know enough colloquialisms, but I'm drawn to it because it's unnatural to me, right? And I'm talking about I grew up in a little town that separated from up the hill and down the hill. So if you grew up the hill, they done told you not to go down the hill. But when they tell you not to, that's the only place you want to be, right? And my mother grew up down the hill, but raised us up the hill. But my dad, who didn't grow up in this town, who came there after he lost both his legs, stayed in the bottom. That's where he lived. He was down there all the time. So it's like, how do I get to know this other part, which for me could have felt like at that point it was cultural and racial, but it was really my father. I just wanted to know what drew him there, right? So I want to be down there too. Right, let's go. Right. So when I'm tracing those breadcrumbs back of awareness and transformation, I'm like, okay, big picture, I'm a soul that loves depth, intimacy, and being heard, right? Like, so I will do whatever I need to do to communicate with people because people are my first love, right? And so when I think about that in my spiritual practice, it translates into my teaching practice because the way that I was raised, we've talked about this before in terms of like education, being like the only little brown girl in the classroom, the only little brown girl in the dance recital, the only brown girl in the pageants, all that only that led me in my career to be the only, right, the first Black woman to be tenured at this PWI, but also it prepared me early on in my family to be in that orbit, like that outside orbit by myself, to be on the margins. And so some people look at marginalization as negative, and I look at it as one of the biggest gifts I've ever been given because I get to see the whole playing field. Wow. I get to pick and choose which character I want to be. And it's not inauthentic, it's perspective. And so I think that's how this particular state of a person came to be, because loneliness and solitude don't disturb me. They give me process time, and they give shaping time, because then I can come back, I can reemerge as the thing I really was working on. And that was trickled through all of college and all of my kind of dance career too, because, not having a lot of means will make you go inside. You look,
sure.
I can't be at the club. I can't buy no bottles. We can't go shop. I can't go shopping with y'all. Right. I got right, figure me out. So I remember many days just going to Barnes and Noble, buying a cup of coffee, and like planting myself in the self-development section of Barnes and Noble, and just be there all day. Right. Yeah. In the astrology section, just be there all day. In the health section, just be there all day. Right. Then when my cup of coffee was done, I would have to go back home because we ain't got money for another cup. But now we got a lot of good information. Let's ponder this. And I'm there with my journal, just figuring things out on my own. Because by the time we got to college, my girlfriends and I were kind of in a different mental space. I had already kind of maxed out my hot girl, like in high school. I was like, okay, I done. Yeah, where y'all going? I did that already. I'm good. So that part. And I also think the crumbs have led me to understand that my soul does not exist in the same time realm as most of the people that I'm with, right? So I have a warped time. By the time I was, before I was 40, I had, gone to college, gone to graduate school, started a dance company, become someone's mother, toured around the world with 5 iconic dance companies, become a professor, become the chair of the department, and like before 40, so it was like, now what?
Wow. Yeah. Wow.
Right. So that accelerated sense of time has also, I think, been a part of this soul navigation journey, because souls don't operate in our time.
Right. At all, for sure.
I find that when I click in to the yes in here, things move so fast that I don't even know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's heavy.
Yeah, I mean that's my assessment. Who knows?
Yeah.
That's what I
like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it.
But it's also right. It's also the thing that like accelerated time is the thing that we talked about last week, right? Because my rock bottoms are usually when I'm so in it that I can't see anything else, and then when I come up for air, I'm like, oh, okay, right? Yeah. So like I was talking to somebody. One of my students was like, what are you gonna do? I was like, well, honestly, y'all, I could keep coaching, or I could shave my head, get a red robe, and live in Tibet. They were like, but those are so different. I was like, they're actually not. It's all the same thing. They're both the same. They're both the same exact thing. They just look different. Right.
Yeah. One of the things one of my aha moments I just got recently is this idea of having 2 different gut feelings when it comes to, right? Gut. And so for me, it's of course there's the gut feeling of the intuition, but but instinct is also a gut feeling as well.
Yes.
So right. So being able to distinguish them has been my work the last couple of years, right? And this ties into my SoulCare, right? And so growing up, I'm from a big city. I'm from Chicago, right? And I ran the streets even as a kid. I ran the streets as a kid. Like I allowed the community to convince me that I was an extrovert. And I'm not an ambivert. I'm not an ambivert. I'm an introvert. I'm good with me. I could be by myself for days at a time. I could sit still. I derive. And so from a spiritual standpoint, I learned that the spiritual soul definition of introvert versus extrovert is where you derive your power from. I love people, but I got to get it in here and allow it out, right? If I don't get it settled in here, people will drain it out of me. There are other people who need to tap without, and then they feel good with them. So so it's the opposite of me, but I didn't know that until I got good and grown.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. So it cost me because I wasn't able to distinguish like my intuition versus my instinct. Now, growing up, on meager beginnings by a single mom, working class poor, instincts was up. We were actually taught instincts, right? So we had them, and my mother was like, so because my mother grew up in Chicago.
Yeah.
So my mom was like, this is how you move. This is how you survive. Right, exactly. And so when it was time to get the other gift, the intuition, I was fighting against it still in civil mode, which is the instinct. And they can't coexist. They could surface at different times. So even when I started doing well, I was a principal at 30 years old, making $100,000 25 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Still moving on instinct. Clash, right? I had the formal, I had to talk, I had it, but I had to do that soul care work. I had to move over. And no one taught me that. I actually had to learn that myself.
Yeah. Same here. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's generational, right? People move from having to getting to. Right? They had to survive. We get to thrive. The next people get to evolve. Like we're kind of in this thing together. But I think the teaching and the learning is so fundamental to another quality, I think, which is about soul care, which is vulnerability. And when you are trying to stay alive, being vulnerable is not an option.
Correct. Correct. Correct.
It's like,
correct.
And in this, you brought up capitalism before, right? Like in this country, we shame people for eating fast food as if they can go to the co-op.
Exactly. I'll be at the grocery store like for real. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Well, it brings us back to soul care. We're talking about food, but this really brings us back to the idea that soul care is about nourishment and design. And I think the introspection is about understanding how your own design needs to be nourished so that your life, your gift, your love, your relationships, all can be fed and be feeding your well of joy.
Yeah. I think I'm at a point in my life where the more complicated a person appears or seems, the more soul work they seem to have done. Not the opposite they did, right? Like, yeah. So I've sort of taken a shifting my filters like, they seem very complicated. Not in a bad way, just complicated. And I'm like, oh, they doing some real soul work.
Yeah.
I know complication when I see it.
Yeah,
right?
Because
doing some soul work.
Yeah, I think you're right. The complexities of being authentic in a world where like you could filter anything.
Yeah.
Like what?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage. Listen, y'all, if you're out there and you're trying to do this work and the people around you are not understanding you, that's okay. It's their missed opportunity when you're misunderstood. It's their missed opportunity when you are misunderstood. Y'all got that? Okay. Right. So don't let someone's questions undermine your transformation. Use that as an opportunity to clarify the work you're really doing, what you would really love, and to take care of your soul, not just protect your reputation.
Right. It's funny you mentioned that. I was working with a client yesterday out of Virginia, Latina woman, and I forget what showed up, but we came up with this: the notion of accommodating equals overcompensating. Right? Accommodating equals overcompensating. To your point, like the whole notion of trying to accommodate others with who you are causes an overcompensation on your part.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And I think you're making a great distinction, trying to make an accommodation for people with who you are, not what you have. The tools I have at my disposal may be able to make an accommodation for you and I to be in this scenario together. But if it comes to me having to be the bridge for the two of us, I can't lay down. I can't.
Exactly. Exactly. And knowing the distinction with that, because sometimes we think the tools and extension and the skills and the talent is actually who we're not a part of us. Right? We envelop ourselves in the titles and the jobs. I'm a mother, I'm a father, I'm a this, I'm that.
Yeah. Okay, Curt, let's give him a let. Hold on, 1 second.
Okay.
Like my battery come down. Okay. We're back. Just want to make sure the computer didn't die, y'all.
Okay.
I want to let's figure out a way, because in these last 3 segments, we've covered just about, I think, anything someone could have a question about in terms of breaking down their habits, finding new rituals, creating a life by design, finding self-love, developing soul care. But what is your hope out of these 3 conversations that we've had that you hope, what's the nugget you hope people hold on to?
That's a good question. I'm hoping that whatever that nugget is was sort of like a freedom paper. Like oftentimes we look for a nugget to like, what did you get? I invite people to have a nugget to like let a lot of stuff fall away. Like what you gave up as a result of the nugget. Like, oh, that 2 millimeter shift that we've heard of, like opened up 15 feet. All right. So I'm hoping that people show up to spaces like this open, right? Which is part of taking care of your soul, right? The openness is part of taking care of your soul. What comes to mind is I was talking to Tavis a couple months ago, and he asked me why young Black boys don't take on this whole notion of being vulnerable. And I said, because they don't see value in it. To your point, they cannot, not in a survival mode, right? And so I apply that to adults who may be externally doing well, but still internally in survival mode, which sort of backs the soul work in the corner. Right? Sort of backs to the self-care. Instead of the soul care, they go to the self-care, thinking that's the same thing. I like people to hold on to that distinction. Soul care and self-care are different.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a good one, Curt. And it just reminded me of something we talked about with Coach Rob a couple of weeks ago, that you could be in the C-suite with a sharecropper mentality.
Sure.
Because the work is in here. Yeah. Well, listen, I think you know that I'm grateful for your time. I love having these conversations with you. I think some people have really loved and enjoyed this 3-part series. For those of you who are just tuning in out there, I also want to make sure that everybody knows, and this is a real testament to why I have other people on my team, is that because when I'm in the flow of doing something, I don't be thinking about telling other people about it. I just be doing it. It just feels like the work that's at hand. But you can catch every episode of Wisdom Wednesday with Christal Brown on Spotify through our podcast network, Anchor FM. So we're going to drop the link here. So if you want to be listening to it tomorrow at work or something like that, I've been forgetting to tell y'all that for like a long time. But I'm saying, catch up. You can do whatever you want. Then you can fast forward. Curt, thank you so much for joining us. Those of you who are out there, if you're ready to do the work, check in, save the date right now. May 27th is going to be our next Vision Camp virtual, because there's not going to be any excuses not to get to this one. All you got to do is log on. We'll see you on May 27th, and see us back here next Wednesday for another topic, another soulful conversation. And thank you for being a part of this community. We love you. We'll see you soon.
Appreciate you.